How on earth do they know me? This place is huge.
$1, that's all she had. $1 and a jacket. And she gave both of them to a stranger shivering in the rain. What she didn't know, that stranger was worth more than most countries, and what he was about to do to her life. Nobody saw it coming, not even him. Madison Clark had exactly $1 to her name. In 48 hours, she'd be evicted. But when she saw the old man trembling in the rain, she made a choice that would change everything. What she didn't know. That beggar was worth over $3 billion, and he was about to turn her entire world upside down. This is the story of a test, a secret, and a twist so unexpected you won't believe it's real. Stay with me because by the time we reach the end of this story, you're going to question everything you thought you knew about kindness, wealth, and what it truly means to see another human being. What if I told you that the poorest person in the room could teach the richest man in the world what it means to be wealthy? That's exactly what happened. And it all started on a street corner on a cold November night. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, to understand why this moment mattered so much, we need to go back. Back to where Madison Clark's story really began. Madison wasn't always poor. She wasn't always one paycheck away from homelessness. There was a time when she had dreams that reached beyond the horizon, when her future looked bright and full of promise. Madison grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and your business. Her father, Thomas Whitaker, taught history at the local high school. Her mother, Victoria Adams, worked as a nurse at the county hospital. They weren't wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, but they had something money couldn't buy. They had love, they had stability, they had each other. Madison was their only child, and they poured everything they had into giving her opportunities they never had. She excelled in school, not because she was pressured to, but because she genuinely loved learning. She had this spark in her eyes when she talked about the future, this unshakable belief that she could build something beautiful with her life. Her passion was architecture. She would spend hours sketching buildings, imagining structures that could inspire people, places where communities could gather and feel safe. She dreamed of designing libraries, community centers, spaces that would outlive her and serve generations to come. When Madison got accepted to college on a partial scholarship, her parents cried tears of joy. It was everything they had worked for, everything they had hoped for their daughter. She moved into a tiny dorm room 3 hours from home, and for the first 2 years everything went according to plan. She made friends, she maintained her grades, she volunteered at a local nonprofit that built affordable housing. Life was good. Life made sense. But then, during her junior year, everything collapsed. Her father started feeling tired all the time. He brushed it off at first, blamed it on long hours and the stress of teaching. But when he started losing weight rapidly and experiencing pain that wouldn't go away, Victoria insisted he see a doctor. The diagnosis came back like a death sentence: stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months, maybe a year if he was lucky. The world stopped spinning for Madison and her mother. How do you process news like that? How do you continue with normal life when the person you love most is dying right in front of you? Thomas fought hard. He went through chemotherapy, radiation, every treatment the doctors recommended. Victoria worked double shifts to cover the medical bills that insurance wouldn't pay. And Madison, 20 years old and terrified, made the hardest decision of her life. She dropped out of college to come home and help take care of her father. She took a job waitressing at a local diner, then picked up a second job cleaning offices at night. She would work until 2 in the morning, come home and help her mother change her father's bandages, catch a few hours of sleep, and do it all over again. The medical bills piled up faster than they could count them. Chemotherapy sessions cost thousands of dollars each. Medications that weren't covered by insurance drained their savings. They sold the car. They took out a second mortgage on the house. They borrowed money from relatives who could barely afford to lend it. And through it all, Thomas Whitaker fought to stay alive, not for himself, but because he couldn't bear the thought of leaving his wife and daughter drowning in debt. He held on for 14 months, far longer than the doctors predicted. But cancer doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care how much you're loved or how hard you fight. On a Tuesday morning in March, surrounded by his wife and daughter, Thomas Whitaker took his last breath. Madison held his hand as the life drained from his body, and something inside her broke that day, something that would never fully heal. They buried him on a Saturday. It rained, which seemed appropriate. The funeral was small but filled with love. Former students came and shared stories about how Mr. Whitaker had changed their lives, how he'd stayed after school to tutor them, how he'd believed in them when no one else did. Madison listened to these stories and felt proud of her father, but she also felt crushed by the weight of what came next. The medical debt didn't die with her father. It lived on, a constant reminder of their loss. Madison and her mother owed over $87,000 to hospitals, doctors, and pharmaceutical companies. They had to sell the house just to make a dent in what they owed. Victoria and Madison moved into a small apartment, and Victoria went back to work despite being exhausted and heartbroken. But grief has a way of attacking when you're already down. 6 months after losing Thomas, Victoria had a heart attack at work. She survived the initial event, but her heart had been damaged beyond repair. The doctors told Madison her mother needed surgery, medication, careful monitoring, more medical bills, more debt, more impossible choices. Madison watched her mother fade away over the next 4 months. Victoria tried to stay strong, tried to hide how much pain she was in, but Madison could see the truth. Her mother was giving up, not because she wanted to, but because she was so tired of fighting. On a quiet Sunday evening, Victoria Adams passed away in her sleep. Madison found her in the morning, peaceful and still. She was 24 years old and both of her parents were gone. She had no siblings, no close relatives who could help. She was completely alone. The funeral costs wiped out what little money Madison had managed to save. She inherited her mother's debt on top of her father's. She was working 3 jobs, sleeping an average of 4 hours a night, and still falling further behind every month. The apartment she shared with her mother, she could barely afford it on her own. The eviction notice came on a Thursday. She had 30 days to come up with $400 in back rent or she'd be on the street. Madison looked at her bank account and felt the walls closing in. She had 63 cents to her name. 63 cents and 30 days to figure out how to survive. She picked up extra shifts wherever she could. She sold everything she owned that had any value. Her laptop, her phone, her mother's jewelry, even her father's watch. She ate 1 meal a day, sometimes less. She walked everywhere to save bus fare. And still, it wasn't enough. With 2 days left before eviction, Madison counted out the money she'd managed to scrape together. $347. She was $53 short, and she had no idea where she was going to get it. That night, November 17th, Madison finished her shift at the diner at 11 o'clock. It had been a long day. Her feet ached, her back hurt, and she was so exhausted she could barely think straight. It was raining, that cold November rain that seeps into your bones and makes you question everything. She pulled her thin jacket tighter and started walking home. That's when she saw him, an old man huddled against a brick wall, shivering violently. He had no coat, no blanket, nothing to protect him from the cold and rain. His lips had a blue tint to them, and his hands shook as he tried to pull his thin shirt tighter around his body. Madison stopped walking. She stood there on the sidewalk, rain soaking through her jacket, and looked at this man. She thought about walking past him. God knows she had her own problems. She had $53 standing between her and homelessness. She couldn't afford to help anyone. But then she looked at his face, really looked at him, and she saw her father. Not literally, of course, but she saw the same pain, the same vulnerability, the same desperate need for someone to care. She opened her purse and counted what she had. $1.63. That dollar was supposed to buy her dinner tomorrow. Those 63 cents were supposed to get her halfway home on the bus the next day. If she gave them away, she'd have nothing. She'd go hungry. She'd walk an extra 3 miles. But this man looked like he might not survive the night. Madison made her choice. She walked over to the old man, knelt down beside him, and gently pressed the dollar bill into his cold hands. "I'm sorry it's not more," she said softly, "but please get yourself something warm, okay?" The old man looked up at her with watery eyes. clearly surprised that anyone had stopped, that anyone had seen him. "Miss," he started to say, "you don't have to do this." "I know," Madison replied, "but I want to. Please take care of yourself." Then she did something that would change both of their lives forever. She took off her jacket, the only jacket she owned, and draped it over his shoulders. It wasn't much, just a thin windbreaker that barely kept out the cold, but it was all she had. The man stared at her in shock as she smiled at him, not a pitying smile, not a condescending smile, but a genuine smile that said, "You matter, you're worth something, you're not invisible." She didn't wait for him to thank her. She didn't take a photo for social media. She didn't tell anyone what she'd done. She simply stood up and walked away into the rain, wrapping her arms around herself to try to stay warm. What Madison didn't know was that the man she just helped wasn't homeless at all. His name was Samuel Edwards, and he was one of the wealthiest men in the country, worth over $3 billion. To understand why a billionaire was sitting on a street corner pretending to be homeless, we need to understand Samuel Edwards' story. Samuel wasn't born wealthy. He grew up in poverty in Detroit, the son of a factory worker who drank too much and a mother who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Samuel learned early that if he wanted something in life, he'd have to fight for it. Nobody was going to hand him anything. He put himself through community college working night shifts at a warehouse. He studied business and real estate, spending every free moment learning everything he could about property investment and development. He had a gift for seeing potential where others saw nothing. An abandoned building in a rough neighborhood. Samuel saw a renovated apartment complex. A vacant lot overgrown with weeds. Samuel saw a shopping center that could serve the community. By the time he was 30, Samuel had built his first small apartment building. By 40, he owned properties in 6 states. By 50, he was a billionaire with a real estate empire that spanned the entire country. Hotels, shopping centers, office buildings, residential complexes. The Edwards name was synonymous with success, with wealth, with power. But success came at a cost. Samuel's marriage fell apart when he was 42. His wife left him, not because he was cruel or abusive, but because he was never there. He was always working, always chasing the next deal, always building his empire. She took their daughter, Chloe, and moved across the country. Samuel threw himself even deeper into his work to avoid the pain. Chloe grew up visiting her father on weekends and holidays, watching him build buildings but never watching him build relationships. She saw him get wealthier and wealthier, and she saw him get lonelier and lonelier. By the time Chloe was 21, she'd had enough. She confronted her father during a holiday visit, telling him that he'd become someone she didn't recognize, someone who valued money more than people, someone who couldn't see beyond profit margins and property values. Samuel dismissed her concerns. He told her she didn't understand business, didn't understand what it took to build something lasting. The argument escalated and Chloe said something that would haunt Samuel for the next 20 years. She looked her father in the eye and said, "You've built an empire, but you've lost your soul. I don't want your money. I don't want anything from you. I just wanted a father and you couldn't even give me that." She walked out that night and disappeared. Changed her name. Cut all contact. Samuel hired private investigators to find her, but Chloe had made it clear she didn't want to be found. For 2 decades, Samuel searched for his daughter while his empire continued to grow. He added another billion to his net worth, opened properties in 12 more states, appeared on magazine covers as one of the most successful real estate developers in the country. But every achievement felt hollow. Every milestone felt meaningless. Because at the end of the day, he went home to an enormous penthouse apartment that was completely empty. Samuel started asking himself questions that kept him awake at night. If I lost everything tomorrow, would anyone care? If I died tonight, would anyone mourn me, or would they just fight over my money? Have I built anything that actually matters? These questions became an obsession. Samuel realized he'd spent his entire adult life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Business partners who saw dollar signs. Associates who kissed up to him because of his wealth and power. Even his friends, if he could call them that, seemed more interested in what he could do for them than who he was as a person. Samuel started wondering if genuine human kindness still existed in the world. Did people help each other anymore? Or had society become as cold and transactional as his business deals? He needed to know. So he came up with a plan, an experiment that would either restore his faith in humanity or confirm his worst fears about the world. Samuel Edwards decided to disguise himself as homeless and spend time on the streets, observing how people treated him when he had nothing to offer them. He wasn't looking for money or food. He had billions. He was looking for something far more valuable. He was looking for proof that goodness still existed, that people could see beyond appearances and status and simply recognize another human being in need. Samuel worked with a makeup artist to change his appearance. They aged him, dirtied him up, gave him the weathered look of someone who'd spent years on the streets. He wore tattered clothes, stopped shaving, and practiced the posture and mannerisms of someone defeated by life. Then he picked a street corner in a different city from where he was known and sat down to watch humanity pass by. For 3 months, Samuel sat on various street corners in different neighborhoods. He experienced things he'd never experienced in his privileged life. People stepping over him like he was trash, teenagers mocking him and filming it for social media, business people in expensive suits walking past without even glancing in his direction. He was invisible, less than invisible. He was an inconvenience, an eyesore, something to be avoided or removed. A few people gave him spare change, but they never looked at his face, never acknowledged him as a person. They'd toss coins in his direction and hurry away as if poverty might be contagious. Samuel started to lose hope. Maybe the world really had become as cold as he feared. Maybe kindness was dead, replaced by indifference and self-preservation. Maybe his daughter had been right about everything. He was about to give up on the experiment entirely when Madison Clark walked past him on that rainy November night. Samuel was genuinely cold and miserable that night. The temperature had dropped into the 30s and the rain was relentless. He'd been sitting there for 3 hours and not one person had stopped. Hundreds of people had walked past and he might as well have been invisible. He was shivering, his hands were numb, and he was seriously considering calling his driver to come get him. That's when he saw her. A young woman walking quickly, hunched against the rain, clearly exhausted from a long day. She was going to walk right past him just like everyone else. Samuel was sure of it, but then she stopped. She actually stopped and looked at him, not past him, not around him, but directly at him. Samuel saw her open her purse and count out money. He could see in her face that she was having an internal debate, weighing something important. Then she walked over to him, and what happened next shocked Samuel to his core. This young woman, who clearly didn't have much herself based on her worn clothes and thin jacket, gave him what appeared to be her last dollar. She spoke to him gently, with genuine concern, not with pity or condescension. She treated him like a human being. And then she did something that broke through every wall Samuel had built around his heart. She took off her only jacket and gave it to him. In the freezing rain, she gave a stranger her jacket and walked away with nothing to protect her from the cold. Samuel sat there holding that dollar and wearing that jacket, and for the first time in 20 years he cried. Not delicate tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere he'd locked away decades ago. This young woman had no idea who he was. She didn't know he could buy her entire apartment building without thinking twice. She didn't want recognition or reward. She just saw another human being suffering and decided to help, even when it cost her something she couldn't afford to lose. Samuel made a decision right there on that wet street corner. He was going to find this woman. He was going to learn everything about her. And he was going to test whether her kindness was genuine or whether it was a one-time act of charity that would fade when circumstances changed. He pulled out his phone from a hidden pocket in his tattered clothes and called his head of security, Aaron Peterson. "I need you to find someone," Samuel said, his voice still shaking with emotion. "Young woman, mid-20s, just walked east from my location. I need to know everything about her by morning." Aaron didn't ask questions. He'd worked for Samuel long enough to know that when his boss used that tone, it was important. Within 6 hours, Samuel had a complete file on Madison Clark. Her full name, her address, her employment history, her financial situation, and most heartbreaking of all, her story. Samuel read about Thomas and Victoria, about medical debt and sacrifice, about a young woman working herself to exhaustion just to survive. He learned that Madison was 2 days away from eviction, that she'd given him literally her last dollar, that the jacket she draped over his shoulders was the only one she owned. The more Samuel read, the more ashamed he felt of his own life. Here was a woman who'd lost everything and still found it in her heart to help a stranger. Meanwhile, Samuel had spent decades accumulating more wealth than he could ever spend while losing sight of what actually mattered. Madison reminded him of someone, and it took Samuel a few hours to realize who. She reminded him of his daughter Chloe before he drove her away. That same kindness, that same genuine concern for others, that same inability to walk past suffering without trying to help. Samuel had crushed those qualities in his relationship with Chloe by teaching her that success meant stepping over others, that sentiment was weakness, that money was the only thing that mattered. No wonder she'd left. No wonder she'd changed her name and disappeared. She'd seen what he'd become and wanted no part of it. But now, sitting in his penthouse reading about Madison Clark's life, Samuel saw a chance to do something meaningful. Not just help one person, but understand something fundamental about human nature. He wanted to know if Madison's kindness was inherent to who she was or if it was situational. Would she stay kind if her circumstances changed? Would wealth corrupt her the way it had corrupted him? Would power change her essential nature? Samuel decided to run an experiment, but unlike his street corner test, this one would last much longer and dig much deeper. He was going to change Madison's circumstances dramatically and watch what she did, not from a distance, but up close. He wanted to see if genuine goodness could survive when tested by comfort, money, and opportunity. 3 days after their encounter on the street, Madison received a letter. She was sitting in her tiny apartment, trying to figure out which bill to pay first with money she didn't have, when she heard a knock at her door. She opened it to find nobody there, just an expensive-looking cream-colored envelope sitting on her doormat. Madison picked it up, confused. The envelope was heavy, high-quality paper with her name written in elegant script across the front. She brought it inside and opened it carefully, half expecting some kind of scam or joke. Inside was a letter written on matching stationery and a check. Madison read the letter first, her hands beginning to shake as she processed the words. The letter was from someone named Samuel Edwards, though the name meant nothing to her. He explained that he was the man she'd helped on the street corner 3 nights ago, that he wasn't actually homeless, and that her act of kindness had meant more to him than she could possibly understand. He apologized for the deception and explained that he'd been testing whether genuine compassion still existed in the world. Madison had passed his test, and he wanted to thank her. Then Madison looked at the check, and her vision went blurry. $100,000. She blinked hard and looked again, certain she was misreading it. But no, it was real. $100,000 made out to Madison Clark, signed by Samuel Edwards. This had to be fake. It had to be some kind of cruel joke. People didn't just hand out checks for $100,000 because someone gave them $1. It was impossible. Madison's first instinct was to throw the whole thing away, but something stopped her. What if it was real? What if this Samuel Edwards person actually wanted to help her the way she tried to help him? With trembling hands, Madison called the bank listed on the check. She explained that she'd received a check and wanted to verify it was legitimate before trying to deposit it. The bank representative asked her to hold while they looked up the account. Madison waited, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The representative came back on the line and asked Madison to repeat the check number. Madison did, thinking here it comes here, where they tell me it's fake and I'm an idiot for hopping. But instead, the representative said something that made Madison's knees buckle. "Ma'am, that check is valid and the funds are available in the account. Would you like to come in and deposit it today?" Madison sat down hard on her couch, the phone still pressed to her ear. It was real. $100,000. From a stranger, because she'd given him $1 and her jacket. She thanked the bank representative and ended the call, then sat in stunned silence for almost an hour just staring at the check. Part of her was elated. This money could change her life. She could pay off her debt, keep her apartment, maybe even go back to school eventually. But another part of her was terrified. Why would someone do this? What did he want from her? The letter had said he wanted to see what she'd do with this opportunity, that he was curious if money would change her. That phrase stuck with Madison. It felt like there was more to this than simple generosity. It felt like she was still being tested. But regardless of the why, Madison had a decision to make. She could try to return the money, track down this Samuel Edwards and tell him she couldn't accept it. Or she could take the gift she'd been given and try to build a better life. Madison thought about her parents, about how hard they'd fought to give her opportunities, about how they'd sacrificed everything for her future. She thought about her father's dying words to her when she told him she was dropping out of school. He'd grabbed her hand with what little strength he had left and said, "Promise me you'll finish. Promise me you won't let this beat you. You're meant for something more than this." Madison had promised, even though she hadn't believed it at the time. But now, holding this check, maybe she could actually keep that promise. Madison went to the bank the next morning, half convinced that this would all fall apart, that security would escort her out for trying to deposit a fraudulent check. But the transaction went through without a hitch. The teller smiled at her and said the funds would be available in 2 business days. Madison walked out of that bank in a daze. For the first time in years, she could breathe. She paid her rent that day, covering the back payments and putting down enough for the next 3 months. She called the hospital and set up a payment plan for her parents' medical debt. She went to the grocery store and bought actual food, not just the cheapest items she could find. That night, she slept for 10 hours straight, the first real sleep she'd had in longer than she could remember. But here, what Samuel Edwards was watching for, and here's what separates this story from a simple tale of charity. Samuel had indeed been monitoring Madison, not through invasive means but through careful observation. He wanted to see what she would do with sudden financial security. Would she quit her jobs? Would she splurge on luxuries? Would she change? Madison did none of those things. She showed up to all 3 of her jobs the next day. When her manager at the diner asked if she was okay because she looked tired, Madison didn't mention the money. She just smiled and said she was fine, thanks for asking. She kept working because the money felt fragile, like it might disappear as mysteriously as it had arrived. She learned not to trust good things because they had a habit of being snatched away. But more than that, Madison kept working because she liked her coworkers, because her regulars at the diner depended on seeing her friendly face, because the people at the office building she cleaned at night appreciated how thoroughly she did her job. The work gave her purpose beyond just a paycheck. Samuel watched all of this through reports from Aaron Peterson, who'd been keeping a discreet eye on Madison's activities. Samuel was impressed but not yet convinced. Keeping your job when you get unexpected money is admirable, but it's not transformative. Samuel wanted to see how Madison treated other people now that she had resources. Would she become guarded with her money? Would she develop the kind of self-protective instincts that come with having something to lose? He got his answer 3 days later. Madison was at the grocery store, standing in line with her modest cart of food. In front of her was an elderly woman trying to pay for her groceries. The woman's card was declined. She tried it again. Declined. The cashier, young and impatient, rolled her eyes. "Ma'am, do you have another form of payment?" The elderly woman's hands were shaking as she opened her purse and counted out crumpled bills and change. "I thought I had enough," she said, her voice breaking with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry. I'll put some things back." She started removing items from her bags, making a pile of the things she could live without. Bread, milk, eggs. The essentials were going back on the shelf so she could afford the medicine in her cart. Madison watched this scene unfold, and something inside her cracked open. She saw her mother in this woman. She saw every humiliating moment her family had endured when they couldn't afford basic necessities. Without thinking, Madison stepped forward and spoke to the cashier. "How much is she short?" The cashier checked the screen. 1547. Madison pulled out a $20 bill and handed it to the cashier. "This covers it." The elderly woman turned to Madison with tears streaming down her face. "Oh, honey, you don't have to do that. I can put things back. It's okay." Madison smiled at her, the same genuine smile she'd given to Samuel on that street corner. "I know I don't have to," Madison said gently, "but I want to. Please take your groceries. You need them." The woman hugged Madison right there in the checkout line, sobbing into her shoulder and thanking her over and over. Madison hugged her back, blinking away her own tears, and then quietly finished paying for her own groceries and left before the woman could ask her name. Samuel Edwards watched the surveillance footage of this interaction from his penthouse office. Aaron had pulled it from the store's security system at Samuel's request. Samuel rewound it and watched it 3 more times, studying Madison's face, her body language, the way she'd helped without hesitation or expectation of recognition. This was it. This was what he'd been looking for. Madison Clark had money now enough to change her life, and her first instinct when seeing someone in need was still to help. She hadn't changed. The money hadn't corrupted her. If anything, it had given her the means to be even more generous. Samuel made a decision. He was going to test Madison again, but this time he was going to do it up close. He wanted to see if she'd recognize him, if she'd treat him differently when she knew who he really was. So Samuel put his disguise back on, different this time, and positioned himself on a different street corner in Madison's neighborhood. He waited for 3 hours before he saw her walking home from work. Madison was tired. He could see it in the way she carried herself, but there was something different about her now. She walked with her head up instead of hunched over. She looked around at the world instead of staring at the ground. The weight of constant desperation had lifted just enough to let her breathe. Madison walked right past Samuel at first. He thought maybe she wouldn't notice him at all. But then, just like that first night, she stopped. She turned around and looked at him. Samuel held his breath, wondering if she'd recognize him despite the different disguise. She didn't, but what she did next was even better. Madison walked back to where Samuel sat and knelt down beside him. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "There's a diner around the corner. Can I buy you dinner?" Samuel, playing his role, tried to refuse. "Miss, you don't have to do that. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Madison said firmly. "Come on. When's the last time you had a hot meal?" Samuel allowed himself to be helped up, and Madison led him to the same diner where she worked. She chose a booth in the back, away from stares and judgment. The waitress who came to take their order was Madison's coworker, a woman named Jennifer who'd worked at the diner for 15 years. Jennifer looked at the homeless man sitting across from Madison and then at Madison with raised eyebrows. Madison met her gaze calmly. "We'll both have the soup and sandwich special, please, and coffee." Jennifer nodded slowly and walked away. Madison turned her attention back to Samuel and asked him about his life, where he was from, how long he'd been on the streets. Samuel, hidden behind his disguise and altered voice, found himself moved by her genuine interest. She wasn't asking out of morbid curiosity. She was asking because she cared, because she saw him as a person with a story worth hearing. For the next hour, Madison sat with a homeless stranger and talked to him like an equal. Other customers stared. A few whispered. One man actually complained to the manager that there was a homeless person in the restaurant, and it was making other customers uncomfortable. Madison heard this and stood up. She walked over to the complaining customer and said something that made Samuel's heart swell with pride. "That man over there is a human being having dinner. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should examine why someone else's humanity bothers you so much." The man sputtered and turned red, but he didn't say anything else. Madison returned to the booth and continued her conversation with Samuel as if nothing had happened. When the meal was over, Madison paid for both of them, left a generous tip for Jennifer, and walked Samuel outside. Before they parted ways, she did something that brought tears to Samuel's eyes again. She handed Samuel a piece of paper with her phone number written on it. "If you ever need help," she said, "or if you just need someone to talk to, call me. Please. I mean it." Samuel took the paper with shaking hands and watched Madison walk away into the night. He stood there for a long time, holding that piece of paper, marveling at the fact that this young woman who'd been homeless herself just weeks ago was already reaching out to help others. She passed every test Samuel had put in front of her. She'd proven that her kindness wasn't situational or strategic. It was fundamental to who she was. Money hadn't changed her. Comfort hadn't made her selfish. She was exactly the person Samuel had been searching for. The next day, Samuel Edwards sent Madison Clark a second letter. This time, it wasn't just a thank you. It was a job offer. The letter arrived at Madison's apartment via courier, another expensive envelope that made Madison's stomach clench with anxiety. Inside was a formal job offer from Edwards Real Estate Holdings for a position as Special Projects Coordinator. The salary listed was $150,000 per year. Madison read the letter 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding something. She had no college degree, no business experience, no qualifications for a position like this. Why would anyone offer her this job? Then she saw the postscript at the bottom of the letter, handwritten in the same elegant script as the first letter. "You've passed every test, Madison. Now let's see if you're ready for the real challenge. Please come to the address below tomorrow at 10 in the morning. I promise everything will make sense." Madison barely slept that night. Part of her was excited, but a larger part was terrified. What kind of tests had she been passing? What did this Samuel Edwards want from her? Was this all some elaborate scheme? But she also remembered that the first check had been real, that her rent was paid, that her debt was being handled. Whatever this was, it seemed genuine, even if it was strange. The next morning, Madison put on the nicest outfit she owned, a dress she'd bought at a thrift store for her mother's funeral. She took 3 buses to get to the address on the letter, a towering glass building in the financial district that made her feel incredibly small and out of place. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with security guards and well-dressed people hurrying to and from elevators. Madison approached the security desk, feeling like an imposter, and gave her name. The guard checked his list and smiled at her. "Yes, Miss Clark. You're expected. Top floor. Take the executive elevator on the right." Madison rode that elevator 40 stories up, her ears popping from the altitude change, her heart racing faster with each floor. When the doors opened, she stepped into a reception area that looked like something from a magazine. A friendly receptionist greeted her by name and led her down a hallway to a set of double doors. "This is the main conference room," the receptionist explained. "Mr. Edwards is waiting for you inside. Good luck." The receptionist opened the doors and Madison stepped through, finding herself in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city. It was breathtaking and terrifying all at once. And there, sitting at the head of a long conference table, was a man in an expensive suit. A man who looked vaguely familiar, though Madison couldn't place where she'd seen him before. He stood up as she entered and smiled at her. "Hello, Madison. Please, sit down." Madison sat in the chair he indicated, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. The man sat down across from her and looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to decide how to begin. Finally, he spoke. "My name is Samuel Edwards. We've met before, though you probably don't recognize me like this." Madison frowned, confused. "I don't think we've ever met, Mr. Edwards. I'm sorry, but I think you have me confused with someone else." Samuel smiled gently and said, "3 weeks ago, you gave your last dollar to a homeless man on 7th Street. You gave him your jacket. Do you remember that?" Madison's eyes went wide. "That was you. But you were—" Samuel nodded. "I was pretending to be homeless. I've been conducting an experiment for the past few months, trying to understand if genuine kindness still exists in the world. In 3 months, you were the only person who treated me like a human being." Madison didn't know what to say. She felt embarrassed, as if she'd been caught doing something private. "I was just trying to help," she said quietly. "You looked so cold." "That's exactly my point," Samuel said, leaning forward. "You were 2 days from being evicted. You had $1 to your name, and you gave it to a stranger. Then you gave him your only jacket." "Why?" Madison looked down at her hands. "Because he needed it more than I did." Samuel let that answer hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "I've spent the past 3 weeks watching you, Madison. Not in a creepy way, but I needed to know if your kindness was real or if it was a one-time thing. So I gave you money and I watched what you did with it. Madison felt a flash of anger. You were testing me, like some kind of experiment. Yes, Samuel admitted, and I'm sorry for the deception. But I needed to know. When you have resources, do you hoard them? Do you become protective and selfish? Or do you stay exactly who you are? Madison didn't respond, so Samuel continued. You kept working all three of your jobs even though you didn't have to. You helped an elderly woman at the grocery store. You bought dinner for a homeless man and defended his right to be treated with dignity when another customer complained. You didn't post about any of this on social media. You didn't tell anyone. You just kept being kind because that's who you are. Is there a point to this? Madison asked, her voice sharper than she intended. The point, Samuel said gently, is that you're exactly the kind of person I've been looking for. Madison, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a billionaire. I've built an empire, and I'm completely alone because I spent so long chasing money that I forgot how to be human. My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 20 years because I valued my business more than my relationship with her. I've been searching for her, trying to understand where I went wrong, and that search led me to you. I don't understand, Madison said. What does your daughter have to do with me? Nothing directly, Samuel replied, but you remind me of who she used to be before I ruined it. Kind, generous, genuine. I want to do something meaningful with my wealth, Madison. I want to create a foundation that helps people the way I helped you. But I need someone to run it who won't be corrupted by money and power. Someone who understands what it's like to have nothing. Someone who will make decisions based on compassion instead of profit. I think that person is you. Madison sat in stunned silence. This man, this billionaire, wanted her to run a foundation. It was absurd. I'm not qualified, she said finally. I dropped out of college. I've never run anything in my life. I have no idea how to manage the kind of money you're talking about. All of that can be taught, Samuel said. What can't be taught is integrity. Empathy, the ability to see people as people instead of numbers on a spreadsheet. You have those qualities, Madison. Will you help me? Madison looked at this man who'd tested her without her knowledge, who'd watched her life from a distance, who was now offering her an opportunity that seemed impossible. She thought about her parents, about how they taught her to help others even when it cost you something. She thought about the elderly woman at the grocery store, the homeless man at the diner, all the people she'd encountered who just needed someone to care. If she took this job, she could help people on a scale she'd never imagined. She could turn her own pain into purpose. Madison took a deep breath and met Samuel's eyes. Okay, she said, I'll do it, but I have one condition. Samuel raised his eyebrows. What's that? We help people anonymously, Madison said firmly. No press releases, no publicity. No using their stories for fundraising. We give people dignity along with help. Samuel smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. I wouldn't have it any other way. That's how the Second Chance Foundation was born. Samuel provided the funding, $10 million to start, with the promise of more as needed. Madison became the director, though she insisted on starting with a modest title and salary until she proved she could handle the responsibility. Samuel agreed and spent the next 6 months personally mentoring Madison. He taught her about finance, about managing large budgets, about vetting applicants and making tough decisions about who to help. Madison was a quick study, absorbing information like a sponge and asking questions that impressed Samuel with their insight. She approached the work with the same careful attention she'd given to her 3 jobs, showing up early, staying late, and treating every applicant with respect and compassion. The foundation started small. Their first case was a single mother facing eviction after losing her job due to a medical emergency. Madison personally reviewed the application, verified the details, and approved a payment that covered 3 months of rent and connected the woman with job placement services. Samuel watched Madison handle that first case and knew he'd made the right choice. But he also knew that the real tests were still coming. Because running a foundation with clear guidelines and limited resources is one thing, having access to unlimited wealth and no accountability, that's where most people fail. Samuel needed to know if Madison would stay grounded when tempted by real power. The foundation grew quickly. In the first year, they helped 300 families, medical debt, evictions, Emergency car repairs that meant the difference between keeping a job and losing it. Educational expenses for kids who couldn't afford school supplies. Madison oversaw it all with careful attention to detail and genuine care for each person they served. But Samuel wasn't satisfied yet. He needed one more test, the biggest one, the one that would determine if Madison Clark was truly who she appeared to be or if everyone had a breaking point. 2 years into Madison's work with the foundation, Samuel called her into his office for a private meeting. He looked older than he had 2 years ago and tired in a way that concerned Madison. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked as she sat down. "I'm fine," Samuel lied, "but I need to tell you something important and I need you to listen carefully." Madison leaned forward, suddenly anxious. "What's wrong?" "I'm sick, Madison." Samuel said the words flatly, without emotion. "Cancer. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe less." Madison felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "No," she said. "No, that can't be right. Did you get a second opinion? Have you looked into treatments?" "I'm 69 years old, Madison. I've lived a full life. I'm not interested in spending my last months in hospitals fighting a battle I'm going to lose anyway. But that's not why I called you here." Samuel pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk to Madison. "This is my will. My entire estate, $3 billion, is set to go to my daughter Chloe if she can be located within 90 days of my death. If she can't be found in that time, everything goes to the Second Chance Foundation. To you." Madison stared at the folder like it might explode. "Mr. Edwards, I can't." "You can and you will," Samuel interrupted. "You've proven over these 2 years that you can be trusted with resources. You've helped thousands of people without becoming arrogant or greedy. You still live in a modest apartment. You still volunteer at the homeless shelter on weekends. Money hasn't changed you, Madison. That's why I'm trusting you with this." But Madison barely heard him. She was stuck on one detail. "You said if your daughter can't be found, have you been looking for her?" "Every day for 20 years, Samuel said quietly. "I've hired investigators. I've followed every lead. Nothing. She doesn't want to be found and I can't blame her. I was a terrible father. I chose money over her, over everything. And now I'm going to die without ever telling her I'm sorry." Madison felt tears prick her eyes. "What if I could find her?" Samuel looked up sharply. "What? Your daughter? What if I tried to find her? Would you want that?" "Madison, I've had professionals searching for 2 decades. What makes you think because I'm not looking for an asset or an heir?" Madison said. "I'm looking for a daughter who lost her father. That's different." Samuel studied her for a long moment. "You understand what you're saying. If you find Chloe and bring her home, you lose $3 billion. The foundation loses $3 billion. All the good we could do with that money, I understand," Madison said firmly. "But you deserve to see your daughter again before you die. And she deserves the chance to forgive you if she wants to. That's worth more than any amount of money." Samuel felt tears streaming down his face, the second time Madison Clark had made him cry. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure," Madison said. "Tell me everything you know about her." For the next 6 months, as Samuel's health declined, Madison searched for Chloe Edwards. She approached the search differently than the investigators Samuel had hired. Instead of looking for paper trails and financial records, Madison looked for emotional connections. She found people who'd known Chloe in college, former friends who remembered her before she disappeared. She listened to their stories about a young woman who'd been kind and creative, who'd wanted to be a teacher, who'd been desperate to escape her father's world of wealth and status. One name kept coming up in Madison's conversations: a college roommate who'd stayed in touch with Chloe longer than anyone else. Madison tracked down this woman, now living in Seattle, and flew out to meet her in person. The roommate was wary at first, protective of her old friend's privacy. But Madison wasn't a private investigator or a lawyer. She was just a young woman with kind eyes who explained that Chloe's father was dying and wanted to make amends. The roommate looked at Madison for a long time before speaking. Chloe changed her name. She wanted nothing to do with her father's money or his world. "If I tell you where she is, you have to promise me you won't pressure her. If she doesn't want to see him, you have to respect that." "I promise," Madison said. The roommate gave Madison an address in a small town in Oregon. Madison flew there the next day. The address belonged to a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where kids played in the yards and neighbors knew each other's names. Madison stood on the sidewalk for 10 minutes, gathering her courage, before walking up to the front door and knocking. A woman in her early 40s opened the door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Can I help you?" Madison looked at her and saw Samuel in her features, the same eyes, the same jawline. This was Chloe Edwards, though she'd clearly changed everything else about herself. "My name is Madison Clark," Madison said gently. "I work for your father, Samuel Edwards. I know you haven't spoken to him in a long time, and I'm not here to pressure you or judge you, but I need you to know that he's dying. He has maybe a month left, and the one thing he wants more than anything is to tell you he's sorry." Chloe's face went through a series of emotions: shock, anger, pain. She gripped the doorframe like she needed it to stay upright. "How did you find me?" "Everyone else I paid to look for you was searching for Chloe Edwards," Madison said. "I looked for a woman who wanted to be a teacher, who loved children, who wanted a quiet life away from wealth and power." Chloe stared at her. "Why? Why would you look for me?" Madison took a breath. "Because your father left me everything in his will. If you can't be found within 90 days of his death, $3 billion, I could have just let that happen, but he deserves to see his daughter before he dies. And you deserve the chance to say goodbye if you want to. I'm not here to force you to do anything. I'm just here to give you the choice." Chloe invited Madison inside. They talked for 4 hours. Chloe explained why she'd left, how her father's obsession with money had killed every genuine relationship in his life, how she'd felt like a prop in his success story instead of a daughter. Madison listened without defending Samuel, without making excuses. She just let Chloe speak, let her release 20 years of pain and anger. Then Madison told Chloe about her own story, about losing her parents, about the regrets she carried for not saying certain things before they died, about how she'd give anything for one more conversation, one more chance to tell them she loved them. "I can't tell you what to do," Madison said finally, "but I can tell you that your father is a different person than he was 20 years ago. He told me he was a terrible father and he can't blame you for leaving. He's not asking for forgiveness. He just wants you to know he's sorry. That's all." Chloe cried. She cried for a long time while Madison sat quietly beside her, offering silent support. Finally, Chloe looked up with red eyes and asked the question Madison had been waiting for. "If I go see him, what happens to your $3 billion?" Madison smiled sadly. "I lose it. The foundation loses it. But that's okay. Some things are more important than money." 2 days later, Madison brought Chloe home. She changed her name to Ava Reynolds and built a life as an elementary school teacher, married to a kind man named Nicholas Turner, mother to 2 beautiful children who'd never met their grandfather. Samuel Edwards was in a hospital bed in his penthouse when Madison walked in with Ava. He looked at his daughter, 20 years older than the last time he'd seen her, and broke down completely. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry for everything. I was a terrible father. I chose everything else over you, and I can't ever make that right. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life." Ava stood there for a moment, frozen, before crossing the room and taking her father's hand. "I forgive you," she whispered. "I forgave you a long time ago. I just didn't know how to come back." Samuel got 3 weeks with his daughter. 3 precious weeks where he met his grandchildren, learned about Ava's life, and built a relationship he destroyed decades ago. Madison watched from the sidelines, seeing the joy in Samuel's eyes every time Ava visited, hearing the laughter when his grandchildren told him stories about school. On a quiet Tuesday morning, with Ava holding one hand and Madison holding the other, Samuel Edwards passed away peacefully. The funeral was small and private, nothing like the lavish affair his business associates expected. Just family, a few close friends, and Madison. At the reading of the will the following week, Madison sat quietly, expecting nothing. She made her choice when she brought Ava home. She traded $3 billion for a dying man's peace, and she didn't regret it for a second. But Samuel Edwards had one final lesson to teach her about the nature of true wealth. The lawyer read through the basic provisions first, leaving the bulk of the estate to Ava and her children. Madison was genuinely happy for them. They deserved it, and she knew Ava would use the money wisely. Then the lawyer reached a section that made Madison's breath catch. To Madison Clark. The lawyer read, "Who taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in the lives we touch and the goodness we put into the world. You gave up $3 billion to reunite me with my daughter. That act of selfless love showed me that my experiment succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. You didn't just pass my tests, Madison. You showed me what it means to be truly rich." The lawyer continued. "I leave to Madison Clark $50 million to continue the work of the Second Chance Foundation in perpetuity. But more than that, I name her as co-trustee, alongside my daughter Ava of the Edwards Family Trust. Together, you will decide how to use my fortune to change the world. Madison, you passed every test not because you tried to, but because you didn't know you were being tested. That's real integrity. Use these resources to help others the way you helped me. And please never change who you are." Madison couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She looked at Ava, expecting anger or resentment, but found none. Instead, Ava was smiling at her with tears in her eyes. "My father was right about you," Ava said. "You gave me back my dad when you could have had everything. Thank you. I can't think of anyone I'd rather work with to honor his memory. 5 years have passed since Samuel Edwards died." The Second Chance Foundation, now co-directed by Madison Clark and Ava Reynolds, has helped over 50,000 families escape poverty, medical debt, and homelessness. They've built schools in underserved communities, funded hospitals in rural areas, and created job training programs that have changed countless lives. Madison still lives modestly, despite having access to wealth most people can't imagine. She drives a practical car, lives in a comfortable but not extravagant apartment, and spends most of her time working with the foundation or volunteering at local shelters. She never forgot where she came from or what it felt like to be 2 days from homelessness. Ava left her teaching job but started a new program through the foundation that trains and supports teachers in low-income schools. Her children, now teenagers, volunteer with the foundation during summers, learning the same lessons about compassion and service that their grandfather finally understood at the end of his life. The legacy of that rainy November night continues to ripple outward. Every person the foundation helps is asked to do one thing in return, not to pay back the money, but to help someone else when they're able, to pass on the kindness, to remember that we're all connected, that none of us is truly self-sufficient, and that the smallest gestures can change everything. Madison still thinks about Samuel Edwards often. She thinks about how a man who'd spent his entire life accumulating wealth had to disguise himself as homeless to understand what truly mattered. She thinks about how close he came to dying alone, separated from his daughter by pride and regret. And she thinks about the strange, wonderful way that giving away her last dollar led to finding her purpose. But here, what keeps Madison up at night sometimes? For 3 months, Samuel sat on street corners in various cities, and Madison was the only person who stopped to help. The only one. Thousands of people walked past a suffering human being and did nothing. That reality haunts her because it means that for every Madison Clark in the world, there are thousands of people who have learned to look away, to assume someone else will help, to protect their own comfort above all else. So the work continues. The foundation helps whoever they can reach, one family at a time, one crisis at a time, one act of compassion at a time. But Madison knows they can't help everyone. What they can do is inspire others to stop walking past suffering, to see the humanity in every person, regardless of their circumstances. To remember that the beggar on the corner, the homeless person under the bridge, the struggling single parent at the grocery store, they're all human beings deserving of dignity and compassion. Samuel Edwards spent 3 months testing humanity and found it wanting. But he also found Madison Clark, and through her, he found redemption. He learned that wealth without compassion is poverty of the worst kind. That legacy without love is emptiness. That success without service is failure. His billions will help millions of people over the coming decades. But his greatest gift wasn't the money. It was the lesson that true wealth is measured in the lives we touch, the kindness we show, and the love we give, especially when it costs us something we can't afford to lose. Madison gave her last dollar to a stranger because she saw another human being in need. That choice didn't just change Samuel Edwards' life or Madison's life. It changed the trajectory of thousands of lives that followed. It proved that goodness still exists in a world that often feels dark and cold. It demonstrated that one person, with nothing but compassion and courage, can change the world. So I'll leave you with the same question Samuel Edwards asked himself every day for the last 3 years of his life. If you saw someone suffering today, what would you do? Would you walk past? Would you assume someone else will help? Or would you stop, even for a moment, and see another human being who deserves dignity and compassion? Because here's the truth that Madison Clark understood instinctively and that Samuel Edwards had to learn the hard way. We're all one bad day, one medical emergency, one job loss away from being that person on the street corner. We're all vulnerable. We're all fragile. We're all desperately hoping that if we fall, someone will care enough to help us up. The test isn't whether you help when it's easy or convenient or when cameras are watching. The test is whether you help when it costs you something, when nobody's looking, when there's no reward except knowing you saw another person's humanity and chose to honor it. Madison Clark passed that test with her last dollar and her only jacket. The question is, when your moment comes, will you?